A millionaire happened upon a homeless woman cradling a baby in the woods. As he drew nearer, he was taken aback to discover that the baby had night blanketed the forest, casting deep, shadowy veils over the towering trees. Edward, a 32-year-old millionaire with dark hair and intense green eyes, moved briskly among the twisted trunks. His expensive suit clashed with the rugged wilderness around him. He had set out for a walk to cool down after a heated exchange with his new wife, Vivian. Thoughts spun in his mind until a faint cry caught his attention, rising from a nearby bush. Edward halted, intrigued. How odd. "Who would bring a baby into the forest at this time?" he murmured, eyebrows knitting. He pushed the branches aside out of curiosity and discovered an astonishing scene. A young woman, clearly down on her luck, sat cradling a baby in her arms. Her clothes were threadbare, and her hair was in disarray, adding to her weary appearance. The woman's wide, fearful eyes locked onto Edward, who instinctively took a step back, surprised. She couldn't have been older than 25 and was visibly shaking. The baby in her arms, wrapped in a dirt-streaked blanket, whimpered softly. "Hey, relax. I'm not going to hurt you," he said gently. "Do you need help? I can call someone or take you somewhere safe." His voice softened, trying to ease her fear. The woman, who Edward assumed was a beggar based on her appearance, remained silent, her panicked gaze shifting between him and the baby. Then, Edward noticed something that made his pulse quicken. The baby bore a birthmark on the left cheek, a small crescent, identical to his own. In disbelief, he muttered, "It can't be. That mark, it's just like mine. Who are you? Where did this baby come from?" he whispered, his voice filled with a mix of awe and shock. Just then, the frightened woman stumbled backward, her foot catching on a tree root. Everything slowed to a crawl. As she fell, her arms jerked apart, and the baby slipped from her grasp. Edward's heart froze as he watched the infant's tiny body fly through the air, spinning helplessly. Driven by instinct, he threw himself forward, arms reaching, hoping to catch the baby before it met the unforgiving ground. His pulse pounded as he yelled, "Oh God, no, please, let me reach them in time." Time seemed to slow. Just as he hit the ground, Edward felt the baby's weight in his arms and instinctively rolled to shield the child from the fall. For a moment, he lay still, breathing heavily, holding the infant close. The baby was crying now, clearly frightened, but thankfully unharmed. Edward sat up quickly, scanning for any signs of injury. With a wave of relief, he confirmed the child appeared safe, and then looked at the woman on the ground, still dazed. His voice shook with adrenaline and concern as he said, "The baby's okay, but I need you to tell me what's happening. Why does this child look so much like me? Where are you from?" Slowly, the woman got to her feet, her gaze locked onto Edward. A struggle flickered across her face, torn between the impulse to trust this stranger and fear of what would happen if she did. At last, with a rough, hesitant voice, she said, I can't explain. He's not mine. But I was forced. Please, don't call the police. I didn't want trouble." Edward's mind swirled with confusion, anger, concern, and an inexplicable bond to the child. As the woman held the baby tightly to her chest, stepping back, he extended his hand gently. "Wait, please. I'm not here to harm you. I just want to understand," he urged, trying to convey his intentions. But the woman didn't seem swayed. Her wild eyes darted around the dark woods, desperately seeking a way out. "You don't get it," she rasped, her voice strained with panic. "I can't stay. We'll be caught. You shouldn't have seen us." Before he could stop her, she turned and stumbled into the trees, the baby clinging to her. "Stop," Edward called. "It's dangerous to run like that with a child." The forest seemed to close in on them as they ran, roots tangled in the undergrowth, making every step treacherous. He could hear her labored breathing and the baby's frightened cries. Just as he closed the distance, fate intervened. The homeless woman stumbled over an exposed tree root, losing her footing. It all seemed to unfold in slow motion as she pitched forward, the baby slipping from her grasp. Edward's heart pounded as he watched, horrified, while the tiny form sailed through the air with a sharp, terrified cry piercing the quiet night. He lunged forward, arms reaching desperately, hoping to catch the child before it struck the unforgiving ground. But with a sickening thud, the baby hit the forest floor, missing Edward's fingers by mere inches. An unsettling silence followed, broken only by the labored breathing of Edward and the woman. For a moment that stretched unbearably, no sound came from the small, still figure lying on the ground. Edward rushed over, his heart hammering as he braced himself for the worst. With trembling fingers, he gently turned the baby over, whispering, "Oh God," his voice thick with fear and guilt. "Please, be okay. Cry. Please, cry. Make any noise, anything." The baby's silence pressed down on him like a weight, leaving him breathless and panicked. Finally, a weak cry broke through the tension of the forest. Edward exhaled deeply, his hands still shaking as he carefully lifted the child, inspecting for any visible injuries. "Thank God," he murmured, relief flooding his voice. Beside him, the homeless woman lay still on the ground, seemingly unconscious from the fall. Edward felt torn, his heart racing as he looked from the injured baby to the faint woman. Fumbling for his phone, he dialed 911, his voice shaky with adrenaline as he spoke. "Please, I need an ambulance right now. I'm in the woods near Oak Road. There's an injured baby and an unconscious woman." As he relayed more details, he gently rocked the baby, who continued to whimper softly. The minutes that passed felt like an eternity. When the paramedics finally arrived, the scene filled with urgent activity. Edward reluctantly handed the baby to an EMT, watching anxiously as they checked the child over. Another paramedic tended to the woman, preparing her for transport. "Sir, are you riding in the ambulance?" one of the EMTs asked, turning to Edward. "We'll be heading to the hospital right away. Will you come along?" Edward nodded quickly, his eyes glued to the tiny patient, unable to look away. Inside the ambulance, tension hung thick in the air, punctuated only by the steady beeping of monitors, tracking the vital signs of the baby and the woman by his side. Edward sat there, a feeling of helplessness washing over him as the paramedics worked. Then suddenly, the woman stirred, her eyes slowly opening, and confusion clouded her face until she spotted Edward. "Edward. Edward, thank goodness you're here. I need to talk to you. I don't feel well, and there's something I need you to know." Her voice was faint, but the words sent a shock wave through Edward. "How does she know my name?" he thought, leaning in closer. "How do you know me? What is it you need to say?" The woman attempted to sit up, but was gently held down by the paramedic. Pain flickered across her face, but her gaze locked on Edward's with fierce determination. "The baby," she began, her voice barely a whisper. But before she could continue, the monitors went off with an urgent, frenzied beeping. The color drained from the woman's face, her eyes rolling back. "She's going into shock," a paramedic yelled as they moved to stabilize her, pushing Edward back. He watched, tense, as the team worked urgently. The rest of the trip passed in a blur of sirens, shouting, and the relentless pulse of the monitors. Arriving at the hospital, Edward was left in a chaotic swirl, watching as the baby and the woman were whisked away. A nurse gently led him to the waiting room. "We're doing everything we can. Please wait here," she said reassuringly. Those hours dragged, each second heavier than the last. Edward paced, his mind replaying every moment of the night. Her words haunted him. "The baby. He is." What had she meant? And how did she know his name? Why did the baby bear his exact birthmark, like a mirror image of himself as a child? Suddenly, a loud stir came from the hallway. Nurses hurried past, faces drawn tight with worry, heading toward the neonatal intensive care unit. Heart pounding, Edward strained to catch fragments of their conversations. The baby's vitals are plummeting. Critical desaturation. If we don't act fast, we could lose him. Edward felt a wave of panic rise, gripping him tightly. He sprang to his feet, desperate to follow the nurses, only to be held back by a hospital security guard. "Please, sir, let the doctors do their job," the guard said, his tone firm but sympathetic. Edward took a step back, overwhelmed with helplessness and dread. His legs barely steady, he leaned against the wall, murmuring, "Please, God," as tears began to form. "Don't let that baby die." "I need to know. I need to understand," he thought as time dragged, each second agonizing with uncertainty and fear. At last, after what felt like forever, a doctor appeared, his face exhausted but relieved. "The baby's stable now," he reported. "It was close, but he's a fighter. We had to revive him, but he responded well. The woman, however, is in a coma, and we can't say if or when she'll regain consciousness." Edward nodded, absorbing the news with a mix of relief and concern. "Can I see the baby?" he asked, voice trembling with emotion. "Please. I know it sounds strange, but I hardly know him, yet I feel this need to protect him. I need to know he's okay." In the neonatal intensive care unit, Edward approached the small crib. The heart monitor's constant beep offered a small measure of comfort as the baby lay amid tubes and monitors. Then, something caught his eye. A tiny ID bracelet on the baby's wrist. He leaned closer, reading the name on it. Noah. Edward's mind reeled. Noah. The name he and Megan, his ex-girlfriend, had chosen years ago when they had dreamed about a life together, before everything had fallen apart, months before he married Vivian, and his world had shifted. How could this be anything but coincidence? As he watched little Noah sleep, memories and unanswered questions flooded his mind. The baby's resemblance to him, the name on the bracelet, the birthmark, the beggar's strange words. All of it seemed to hint at a truth he was afraid to face. His heart beat wildly, caught between fear and hope. "Who are you, Noah?" he whispered, gently touching the baby's hand. "And how are you going to change my life?" The questions lingered, unanswered, as the heart monitor's steady beeps echoed, reminding Edward that for now the only certainty was that this little fighter had survived. The rest, the answers, the revelations, the impact, would have to wait. Edward allowed himself a moment to simply be there, watching over the infant who, in some unexplainable way, felt like he belonged in his life. The following morning, he made the drive back home, with baby Noah securely fastened in the car seat beside him. The early light of dawn stretched across the road, bathing everything in a soft golden hue. Edward's heart was a tangle of emotions, relief that the baby was released into his care and nerves about what lay ahead. How would he even begin to explain all of this to Vivian, his new wife? He remembered the doctor's words clearly. "The baby is ready to go home, but he'll need special attention." Looking over at the peaceful Noah, he murmured, "Don't worry, little one. I'll be here for you, no matter what." As he pulled up to the house, Edward took a deep breath, trying to prepare himself for the difficult conversation ahead. Cradling Noah gently, he walked toward the door, feeling each step grow heavier. Just as he reached for the doorknob, it burst open, and there stood Vivian, eyes swollen from crying, her expression a mix of anger and hurt. "Where were you? You just vanished without a word all night," she demanded, her voice trembling with raw emotion. "I was worried sick, imagining all sorts of terrible things, and now you show up with..." Her words caught in her throat as her gaze shifted to Noah. Edward slipped inside, quickly closing the door. "Vivian, please, let me explain," he began. But her sharp, bitter laugh cut him off. "Explain what? That you have some secret child? That you've been unfaithful to me?" She shot back, her eyes narrowing on the baby. As she caught sight of the small birthmark on Noah's cheek, a mirror image of Edward's, her face drained of color. Why does that baby have your birthmark?" she whispered, stumbling backward. Edward carefully set Noah on the sofa, propping pillows around him to keep him safe, before turning to Vivian with his hands raised, trying to calm her. "Vivian, I swear, I don't know who he is. I found him last night out in the woods," he explained. "A beggar had him." But Vivian wasn't listening. Her gaze locked onto Noah, a mix of fury and hurt darkening her expression. "How long, Edward? How long have you been lying to me?" she asked, her voice low and dangerous. The tension in the room was thick and unyielding. Edward tried to reach for her, but she pulled back, as though his touch might harm her. "Vivian, I've never cheated on you," he said firmly. "I love you. But this baby, he was alone, abandoned in the woods. I couldn't just leave him there." The words seemed to ignite a fire in Vivian. She stepped forward, eyes blazing. "You find a baby lost in the woods and just bring him into our home? What about our plans, Edward? Our family? Not a thought for me, huh?" Her voice rang through the large house. Edward felt his own anger rising, frustration from months of silence and secrets surging up. "Not think about you. What about those nights you'd go out, Vivian? Coming back late with a different scent on you?" He saw the shock in her eyes and pressed forward, words rushing out in a flood. "You think I didn't notice? The glances, the hidden messages. Maybe this baby is our chance to do something right, something honest in all this distrust." The crack of a slap filled the room as Vivian moved, in an instant, leaving a red mark on Edward's cheek. "How dare you?" she whispered, tears streaking down her face. "I never betrayed you, not once. All those nights. I was planning a surprise. A getaway, so we could try for a baby ourselves." Her bitter laugh echoed. "How ironic, isn't it? I dreamed of our family, and you bring a stranger's child into our home." Noah's cries cut into their argument. Edward started toward the baby, but Vivian blocked him. "Don't you touch him," she said, her voice trembling. "That baby has no place here. He's not ours." "He's innocent, Vivian. He's not to blame for any of this," Edward said, his voice desperate. In that moment, hurried footsteps approached from the hallway. Their longtime housekeeper entered, her face pale. "Sir, the police are here," she said, her voice shaking. Edward and Vivian turned in shock toward the front door. Through the glass, they could see the flashing lights of several police cars. Edward's heart raced. Did someone report finding the baby in the woods? Or was it something else? Something he still didn't know? Frozen, they heard the doorbell ring through the mansion. The baby's cries grew louder, sensing the tension thickening the air. Edward looked at Vivian, then at the baby, and finally at the door. He knew that opening it would change everything. Taking a final steady breath, he stepped toward the door, questions racing through his mind. What were the police here for? How would this impact the baby? And most pressing of all, did he still have a chance to make things right with Vivian? He knew answers waited beyond that door, and there was no turning back now. Edward's hands shook as he opened the door to find two officers standing solemnly on his doorstep. "Mr. Edward Shaw, we need you to come with us to the station to answer some questions about a baby you brought from the hospital. Please, accompany us," commanded the taller officer, his deep voice echoing in the quiet entryway. Edward gave a small nod, painfully aware of Vivian's gaze fixed on his back. Edward had known his decision to bring the baby home would have repercussions, but he hadn't anticipated the fallout to be so immediate or so intense. "Can I at least know what I'm being accused of?" he asked, striving to keep his tone steady. The shorter officer responded calmly, "There are no charges at this time, sir, but there are suspicions of child abduction." The drive to the station was silent and heavy with tension. Vivian insisted on joining them, her expression an unreadable mask of anger and disappointment. Edward attempted to explain the situation to the officers, only to be advised to save his comments for his official statement. As the police car navigated through the city streets, Edward's thoughts drifted to the baby, left under the maid's care. Did I make the right decision? Or have I just destroyed my life for a child I barely know? He wondered. At the station, he was led into a cold, sterile interrogation room. The detective assigned to his case had weary yet piercing eyes. "Mr. Shaw, we're investigating a report of a baby missing from Central Hospital about a week ago. The infant you brought home fits the description." Edward felt his heart drop. "I found him in the forest last night, cradled by a homeless woman I then took to the hospital. There was no one else to care for him while she was admitted," he explained desperately. The detective lifted a skeptical eyebrow. "Convenient story, isn't it? Especially given your connection to the baby's mother." Before Edward could process the implication, the door to the room burst open and a woman entered. Her face was a mix of exhaustion, fury, and relief, her eyes red from crying. Edward's heart skipped a beat. It was Megan, his former girlfriend. "Where is my son? What did you do to him? Why did you have her take my baby from my arms? I had barely even held him. You had no right. Give me my son back now," she shouted, moving toward Edward. The officers restrained her, keeping her from getting too close. Edward was frozen in place as pieces of the puzzle snapped into focus in his mind. The baby in the woods, the birthmark, the name Noah. It all suddenly made dreadful sense. The room burst into chaos. Vivian, who had been observing from a corner, stepped forward, confronting Megan. "Your son. What are you even talking about?" she demanded, her face a mix of rage and disbelief. Megan turned to Vivian, her eyes fierce. "Edward," she pointed sharply at Edward, "is the father of my son. The son apparently had some beggar woman snatch away." She accused, her words like daggers. Edward tried to rise to declare his innocence, but an officer firmly pressed him back into his seat. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't," he cried out in desperation. The detective attempted to regain control of the situation, his voice cutting through the turmoil. "Ladies, please calm down. Mr. Shaw, we need you to walk us through exactly what happened last night." Edward drew in a deep breath, steadying himself, and began recounting the previous night's events, from his encounter with the beggar woman in the forest to his arrival at the hospital. As he spoke, he noticed Megan's and Vivian's expressions shift, from anger to confusion, and eventually to an uneasy comprehension. When Edward finished, silence weighed heavily in the room. The detective rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Your story is unusual, Mr. Shaw, but we have a witness at the hospital who corroborates part of it. The woman you encountered, the beggar, is in a coma, and she's been identified as an escaped psychiatric patient." Megan broke down, burying her face in her hands. "My baby, my little Noah, in that woman's hands for a week." Vivian, still fuming but visibly rattled, moved to a corner, her gaze fixed on Edward with a mixture of accusation and doubt. The detective straightened, his expression stern. "Mr. Shaw, while it seems your account may hold some truth, we still have many questions left unanswered. You're free to leave for now, but stay within the city. We'll need to take more statements in the coming days." Edward gave a weary nod, feeling both physically and emotionally drained. As he moved toward the door, he met Megan's gaze. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I really didn't know." Megan held his eyes for a moment before looking away, silent tears tracing down her cheeks. Vivian, meanwhile, walked out of the room without a word, leaving Edward alone with the weight of what he'd done and the consequences that loomed ahead. The tension between Edward, Megan and Vivian was thick, nearly unbearable. Turning back to Megan, Edward's voice filled with pain and frustration. "Why didn't you tell me, Megan? About the child? My child?" His words shook, carrying the emotions he'd held back for so long. Megan's tears continued as she stared at him. "You think it was easy for me? I found out I was pregnant after we broke up. You'd already moved on, with her." She pointed at Vivian, who stood nearby watching the scene in stunned silence, her face flushed with both hurt and anger. Edward stepped closer to Megan, his hands trembling. "I had a right to know. You can't just—" But before he could finish, the phone on the detective's desk rang sharply, cutting through the tension in the room. The detective answered, his face shifting from surprise to concern as he listened. He hung up and looked at them. The woman who kidnapped the baby, Julia. She woke up and managed to escape from the hospital. The news struck them all like a cold slap. Megan let out a muffled gasp, while Vivian turned pale, and Edward felt a chill run down his spine. How? Wasn't the hospital being watched? How could she just get away like that? He asked in disbelief. The detective shook his head, equally at a loss. We're not sure how she got out, but I'm mobilizing all units to track her down. Something in Megan's expression changed. Standing up, she wiped her tears away, her face set with determination. I need to see my son now, before she tries anything again. I'm not waiting. I'm going now. Her tone was unyielding. Edward gave a slight nod, feeling the intensity of Vivian's stare. He's at our place. He's safe, he assured her gently. Megan looked at him briefly before giving a firm nod. Then let's go. I want to bring Noah home, where he belongs. Edward felt like he'd taken a punch to the gut. He wanted to argue, to stand up for his own rights, but he knew this wasn't the moment. All right, let's get Noah, he finally agreed, though every word felt reluctant. The drive back to Edward's mansion was filled with tension, the silence heavy. Vivian insisted on taking a taxi, refusing to share the ride with him. When they arrived, Megan hurried inside, following the housekeeper to the room where Noah was. Edward followed, his heart torn in two. The joy of seeing his son clashed with the inevitable heartbreak of losing him once again. Megan gathered Noah in her arms, her face wet with tears of relief. Mommy's here, my love. Forgive me. She took you from me. I was still half out from the meds. I'll never let anyone take you again, she whispered, placing a gentle kiss on Noah's forehead. Edward watched, feeling like a stranger in his own home. Megan, he began hesitantly. I know I don't deserve to ask, but could I see him from time to time? Megan softened, her expression warming slightly. You're his father, Edward. Of course you can see him. But you have to promise me, Edward. She tightened her grip on Noah. Promise you won't try to take him from me. Edward's voice was steady, though his heart was heavy. I swear, Megan, I'll never do that. I just want the chance to be part of my son's life, to give him everything he needs, and be there for him. Megan glanced at him and then the door. I'll call you tomorrow so you can see him, she replied quietly before stepping into the taxi. Edward stood in the doorway, watching the car pull away, taking his newly found son with it. When he turned back inside, he found Vivian in the hall, her eyes blazing. I hope you're satisfied. You've wrecked our marriage for a child you didn't even know existed, she seethed, before storming upstairs, leaving Edward alone with his chaotic thoughts. Night fell over the mansion, wrapping it in an unsettling silence. Edward lay awake, replaying the day's events in his mind, while Vivian locked herself in the guest room, shutting him out completely. Near midnight, as he stood on the veranda gazing into the garden, he caught sight of a shadow moving in the distance. Curiosity, mixed with a hint of fear, he made his way downstairs and out into the darkened garden, his eyes searching through the shadows. At that moment, he spotted her, the woman from the woods, Julia, just as the detective had described, slipping out of the backyard shadows like an apparition. "You, the kidnapper, what are you doing here? I'm calling the police." Edward's voice rang out, laced with both shock and anger. "If you ever go near my son again, you'll find out exactly what I'm capable of." Julia's eyes widened, fear etched across her face. I had to see you," she managed, her voice shaky. "Please don't call the police. I need to explain." She took a cautious step forward. Edward's emotions collided. Anger, confusion, a strange sense of curiosity. "Explain what? Why did you take my son? Why you snatched him from his mother's arms?" he demanded, his voice simmering with fury. Julia flinched but didn't retreat. "No, please, let me explain," she pleaded. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I escaped from the psychiatric hospital weeks ago," she said, her words tumbling out quickly, almost frantic. "I swear I never meant to hurt anyone. I was just running. And then—" A scream pierced the night, cutting her off. "Edward, what's going on out here?" Vivian shouted from the porch, her expression frozen in shock as she saw Julia standing there. She yanked her phone from her pocket. "I'm calling the police now. You made this mess, now you'll pay." Julia panicked, turning to run. Instinctively, Edward reached out, grabbing her arm. "Stop! You need to turn yourself in. It's the only way to make this right." But Julia tore herself loose with surprising strength, vanishing back into the darkness of the garden before he could stop her. Edward stood there, bewildered. Moments later, sirens echoed in the distance. He glanced at Vivian, who returned his look with anger and suspicion. Edward felt the crushing weight of the choices and secrets that had brought him here. How could he explain something he could barely grasp himself? How could he fix the rift in his marriage and life when the truth only seemed to spiral deeper? The next morning arrived cold and grey, mirroring Edward's heavy heart. Due to the chaos of the night and Julia's escape, he had hardly slept. The police had combed the property and nearby areas, finding no trace of her. Now, sitting in his car outside Megan's house, he felt an unsettling mix of dread and anticipation. He glanced over at the small teddy bear resting on the passenger seat, a present he'd picked up for Noah. It was now or never. Today would be the day he would finally meet his son in person, a chance to hold him with the assurance that Noah was, indeed, his own. Muttering quietly to himself, he summoned the courage to step out of the car. Edward was unaware of the inconspicuous car parked across the street, nor did he see Vivian's sharp gaze following his every step. He walked up to Megan's front door, his heart pounding as he prepared for the moment ahead. Just as he raised his hand to ring the doorbell, the door swung open. Megan stood there, holding Noah, her expression a mix of guardedness and resignation. "You came. I wasn't sure you would," she said in a soft, steady tone, moving aside to let him in. Edward gave a slight nod, his throat tightening. "I had to see him. To see both of you," he responded, his eyes fixed on Noah's little face. Inside, the air felt heavy with unspoken words. Megan led him into the living room, where a colorful playmat and scattered toys hinted at Noah's daily presence. Carefully, she set Noah down on the mat before turning back to Edward. "You have 1 hour. After that, "He'll need a nap," she instructed, her voice clear and firm but without malice. Edward nodded gratefully and dropped to his knees beside Noah, enchanted by the baby's every tiny movement and sound. "Hey, Noah. I know we've met before, but we haven't been properly introduced. I'm your dad," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Outside, Vivian continued to watch through the window, her face a mask of barely contained fury. She watched Edward lift Noah, the bright smile lighting up his face as the baby grabbed his finger, and each moment between them was like a stab in her heart. She stepped back into the shadow of a nearby tree and pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed a familiar number. When the call connected, she whispered urgently, "The plan fell through. We need a new approach. And listen, no slip-ups this time. I want it all to go down exactly as we discussed. If anyone messes up, well, you know what's at stake." Her tone was cold, laced with an unyielding threat. Inside, oblivious to the turmoil outside, Edward was fully engaged with Noah. He played with the baby, making funny faces and sounds that brought pure laughter bubbling from his son. From afar, Megan watched quietly, her face slowly softening. "He's got your smile," she murmured, finally breaking the silence. Edward looked over at her, taken aback and moved by her words. "And he's got your eyes," he replied, a wave of regret sweeping over him for all the moments he'd missed. Time seemed to slip by too quickly for Edward's liking, and when Megan mentioned it was time for Noah's nap, it felt like he was being jolted awake from a dream. Reluctantly, he returned the baby to Megan, their hands brushing for a brief moment. They stood together, bound by the life they had brought into the world. "Can I come back tomorrow? I need to see him. You have no idea how happy I am to know he's okay. He's my son." "Can I come tomorrow, please?" Edward asked, his voice betraying a hint of desperation. Megan paused briefly, then nodded. "Yes, same time," she replied, a small smile touching her lips. Edward left Megan's house feeling both uplifted and weighed down. The sadness of having to leave overshadowed the joy of spending time with Noah. Lost in thought, he almost missed noticing Vivian waiting by his car. His heart sank at the icy look on his wife's face. "Vivian, what are you doing here? He began, but she silenced him with a swift gesture. "Don't bother, Edward. You've made your choice. Now live with it," she said sharply. Before he could say anything else, Vivian turned on her heel and walked away, leaving Edward alone with the heavy realization of his choices and a growing fear of what might come. Days later, the tension in their home lingered like a storm cloud, with only minimal necessary words exchanged between them. Edward divided his time between work and his visits to Noah, while Vivian remained cold and distant. But that afternoon, something shifted. As Edward came downstairs, ready for another day at the office, he found Vivian waiting in the living room, her face set in a forced smile. "Edward, honey, I've been thinking. Maybe I overreacted about this whole thing with Noah," she began, her tone unnervingly sweet. Edward froze, taken aback by his wife's sudden change in demeanor. He studied her closely, noticing the tension in her shoulders despite her gentle smile. "What exactly do you mean, Vivian?" he asked carefully, bracing himself for what might turn into another argument. Vivian moved closer, her gaze unwavering. "I mean that," she replied. "Maybe it's time to face the truth. Noah is your son and part of our lives now." She took a breath, as if summoning courage. "Actually, I was thinking, what if I took care of him today? You could bring him here, and I'd watch him while you're at work," she offered, her smile growing as she spoke. Her suggestion completely caught Edward off guard. He looked at Vivian intently, searching her expression for any hint of bitterness or hidden motives. All he saw was resolve, and something he couldn't quite read. "Are you sure, Vivian?" he asked, his voice a mix of hope and doubt. That would mean a lot to me." "I'm sure, Edward. It's time we make this work, as a family." Vivian nodded, her smile seeming a bit more genuine now. The words, "as a family," echoed in Edward's mind, filling him with relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Vivian. I'll call Megan right away," he said, leaning in to give her a peck on the cheek. Hours later, as he left the house, he looked back one last time at Vivian, who held Noah in her arms. A vibrant rattle seemed to be keeping the baby happy. "Megan sent all the instructions, diapers, milk, everything's here. But if you want, I can leave him with her." "Are you sure you'll be fine?" Edward asked for the third time, his hand lingering on the doorknob. Vivian rolled her eyes, her smile a little forced. "Yes, dear. Noah and I are going to have a great time, aren't we, little one?" she cooed, gently poking the baby's tummy, making him giggle. Edward felt a wave of relief and gratitude. "You're amazing, Vivian. Thank you for doing this." He waved goodbye one last time and stepped out, closing the door behind him. As soon as Edward's car faded down the road, Vivian's smile vanished. She looked down at Noah, her eyes narrowing with a cold edge. "So, it's just you and me now, little intruder," she hissed, her voice dripping with disdain. Unaware of the shift in mood, Noah kept playing with his rattle. Vivian walked over to the window, staring out at the empty street. "You have no idea how much trouble you've caused, do you?" she muttered, more to herself than to the child. "Months of meticulous planning, all ruined by your very existence." With steady steps, Vivian carried Noah to the room Edward had arranged for him. She placed him carefully in the crib, leaning close with a cold stare. "You know, little Noah, I had my whole future planned with Edward," she said with a bitter edge in her voice. "A brilliant career, world travel, maybe even kids of our own when I was ready." She paused, her voice dropping to a chilling whisper. "And then, you came along and ruined it all." Noah whimpered softly, as if sensing the hostility radiating from her. She scooped him up roughly, swaying him with stiff, detached motions. "No need for tears, little brat. Crying won't change anything," she muttered, her tone devoid of any warmth. Glancing around the room, she sneered at the bright toys and soft blanket. "You think you can just show up and replace the life I should have had, the life with Edward and the family we would have built together." Her voice trembled with barely contained anger. She set Noah back in the crib, her gaze piercing and calculating. "I can't let you ruin everything," she murmured, inching closer, her eyes fixed on his. "It's nothing personal, just something I have to do." Just then her phone buzzed in her pocket. She checked the screen, a message from an unknown number. "All is set. Awaiting your command." Vivian's lips curled into a cold smile, her expression void of kindness. Casting one last look at Noah, whose eyelids had begun to droop as he drifted off to sleep, she whispered, "Sleep well, little Noah. Enjoy it while you can." Her voice hinted at a quiet threat. "You'll soon be nothing but a fading memory in Edward's life," she added softly, and slipped out of the room, closing the door gently behind her, leaving Noah in a silent, oppressive stillness as she prepared her ominous plan. A few hours later, the sun dipped lower, casting a warm glow over Edward's office. Deep in his work, he found it hard to keep his mind from drifting to thoughts of Noah and Vivian at home. His phone buzzed, snapping him back to reality. It was his secretary, her voice tense with worry. "Mr. Shaw, there's a woman in the lobby insisting on seeing you. She seems very anxious and says it's urgent." Edward frowned, a growing sense of unease settling in his gut. "Who did she say she was?" he asked, feeling his pulse quicken. "I'm not expecting anyone, and I have no appointments on my calendar." Did she mention her name? His voice held an edge of dread. The assistant replied cautiously, "She said her name is Julia, sir." Edward's heart nearly stopped. "Send her up immediately," he ordered, his mind whirling with a flood of possibilities, most of them unsettling. In moments, Julia appeared at his office door. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and glistening with fear, and her hands trembled visibly. Edward rose from his desk, his expression caught between anger and concern. "What are you doing here? You shouldn't be anywhere near here," he said sternly. But before he could continue, Julia cut him off, her voice desperate and breaking. "Please, listen to me," she whispered, her voice laced with terror. "Noah is in danger." The words hit Edward like a fist to the stomach. He grabbed Julia's shoulders, pulling her close as his face hovered just inches from hers. "What do you mean, danger? What do you know about Noah?" he demanded, his tone harsh. Julia's words spilled out in a torrent, her voice trembling but relentless as she began her confession. "Vivian and I have known each other since college," she said, her words tumbling over one another. "She knew about Megan's pregnancy before anyone else. And she planned everything out, long before you were even involved." Edward felt as though the floor had fallen away beneath him. "What? How could that be?" he stammered, reeling. But Julia continued, her words unstoppable, as if a dam had finally broken inside her. "Vivian got me out of the psychiatric clinic," she explained, her voice growing hoarse. "She knew that if things went wrong, I'd be discredited because of my time there. Vivian thought of every last detail months in advance. She wanted me to steal the baby as soon as it was born. My reward for doing this: freedom from that clinic. She planned to have him adopted out somewhere he'd never be found." The room seemed to spin. Edward staggered back to his chair, feeling as though he'd been punched. "No, this can't be true," he muttered, almost to himself. Yet the pieces of the puzzle were coming together, forming a chilling picture he hadn't dared to imagine. Julia's tears fell freely now. "I just couldn't do it," she sobbed. "When I reached the forest with Noah, I couldn't give him up. That's when you found me. I know I have problems, serious ones, but I still have a heart. I couldn't do that to an innocent child, even if it meant I'd never leave that clinic." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "But Vivian, she called me this afternoon." She whispered in a trembling voice that she had taken the baby and planned to hand him over for adoption. "Edward, you have to act now. There's a family ready to take him, and they're planning to leave the country with him." Her voice broke, choked with sobs. In that moment, Edward's world shattered. Vivian's betrayal, the looming threat to Noah's safety, it all merged into a crushing wave of panic and fury. He shot up from his chair, knocking it over with a loud thud. "Oh God, Noah, my son! This can't be happening. Why?" he yelled, bolting toward the phone. His hands trembled as he dialed. "I need to report an attempted kidnapping. My son, my wife." His words came out in fragmented gasps, barely coherent. As he relayed the details to the dispatcher, Edward grabbed his cell phone, dialing Megan's number with his free hand. She picked up on the second ring, her voice groggy. "Edward, it's late. What's going on?" Without a second to lose, he interrupted, his voice rushing with urgency. "Megan, Noah's in danger. Vivian has—" He struggled to finish, words failing under the weight of his fear. On the other end, Megan gasped, fully alert now. "What are you saying? Edward, what's happened to my son? Please tell me he's safe." Her voice quivered with dread and confusion. Finishing the call with the police, Edward focused solely on Megan. "Megan, meet me right now. I'll explain everything on the way, but we have to move quickly. We have to save our son." He hung up, not waiting for her reply, and turned to Julia, who stood trembling nearby. "Are you coming with me?" His voice was firm and unyielding. "You're going to tell everything to the police?" Julia nodded, resigned, and followed Edward as they raced out of the office. In the elevator down to the parking garage, Edward's heart pounded relentlessly in his chest, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Next to him, Julia whispered, "I'm sorry. I never wanted this. I just wanted to leave that terrible life behind. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." But Edward barely heard her, his mind laser-focused on one goal: getting to Noah before it was too late. The car sped through the city streets, with distant police sirens trailing them, and a chilling thought clouded his mind. What if it's already too late? What if Noah's already gone and I never see him again? As night fell, cloaking the city in shadows, a haunting fear for his son's fate loomed ever larger. Finally, Edward's car screeched to a stop in front of his mansion. Megan was already there, her face pale under the streetlights, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. Edward's face went ghostly pale, his anxiety peaking the moment he saw Julia at his side. Without a single word of explanation, he snatched up his cell phone, fingers shaking slightly as he dialed Vivian's number. His heart pounded so violently in his chest that he could hardly think straight, as if it might leap out at any second. When Vivian's voice finally came through on the line, he drew in a long, steadying breath, trying to inject an air of calm confidence into his voice. "Vivian, you were right all along. This baby, it's a complication we just can't afford right now," he said, struggling to suppress the tremor in his voice. "I don't think I'm ready to be a father. I'm planning to put this child up for adoption, and I don't want Megan to know." There was a pause on Vivian's end, thick with anticipation, before she responded softly, "Oh, Edward, I knew you'd see things my way." She quickly supplied her location, urging him to take care of things so they could finally be happy together. He hung up, exchanging a silent yet intense look with Megan beside him. "It's time. Let's bring our son home," he said firmly, his determination unmistakable. They both dashed to the car, and the drive to the adoption center was nothing short of a race against time. Edward's knuckles turned white on the steering wheel, while Megan gripped the dashboard, her face etched with fear, and Julia sat sobbing quietly in the back seat. The blare of police sirens closed in behind them, a daunting reminder that justice was just a heartbeat away. The car screeched to a stop at the address, and Edward bolted out before the engine was even off. He sprinted to the door with Megan right behind, their hearts hammering with a single desperate thought: Noah. They burst into the room to find Vivian holding little Noah in her arms, her eyes widening in shock before narrowing with seething anger. "You lied to me," she spat, clutching Noah closer in a desperate grip. Edward took a measured step forward, hands open in a calming gesture. "Vivian, this ends now. Please give Noah back. Don't make this any harder for yourself." The standoff that ensued was as tense as it was heartbreaking. Vivian's voice alternated between rage-filled threats and tearful pleas, her grip on the baby a mix of fear and defiance, while Edward and Megan inched closer, fearing for Noah's safety. "You don't get it. I did this for us, Edward. For our future," Vivian cried out, her face streaked with tears. Megan, unable to hold back, took a small step forward, her voice breaking as she pleaded, "Please, Vivian, he's just a baby. Our baby." As the piercing sound of police sirens grew closer, hurried footsteps echoed down the hallway, intensifying the tension in the air. Vivian's gaze darted around, desperate to find a way out. She felt cornered, with no option left but a nearby window. For a heart-stopping second, Edward feared she might do something drastic. "Vivian, it's okay. Just give me Noah, please," he urged, his voice steady yet gentle as he took a cautious step forward. Time seemed to hang in the balance, stretching into eternity. Then, as though a spell had been lifted, Vivian collapsed, sinking to her knees. Her arms fell limply away from Noah, allowing Megan to swiftly step forward and gather the baby into her protective embrace. In that moment, the police burst into the room, guns at the ready, their stern commands breaking the silence. Vivian was promptly restrained and handcuffed, as was Julia, who had stood frozen in a corner, eyes wide with both fear and regret. The two women were led out, their fates sealed, as Edward turned toward Megan and Noah. Oblivious to the intense scene that had just unfolded, Noah's innocent smile brightened at the sight of familiar faces. Edward wrapped his arms around Megan and Noah, feeling an unbreakable bond form among them, a vow to protect and cherish their little family. Together, he and Megan decided to embrace the future with renewed hope and love for Noah. On a crisp autumn afternoon, they sat on the grass in the garden of their new home, watching as Noah attempted his first steps, his tiny feet wobbling across the lawn. Edward's gaze met Megan's, his heart swelling with love and gratitude. "Do you believe in second chances?" he asked softly. Megan's smile grew warm as she entwined her fingers with his. "I'm looking at one right now," she replied, leaning in to share a gentle kiss. Noah giggled, stretching his little arms toward them as he toddled over. Edward lifted him up, savoring the comforting weight of his son in his arms. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting shades of golden pink across the sky, Edward knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together as a family. If you enjoyed this story, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Your support inspires us to bring you touching stories daily. Don't miss our next tale, coming up on your screen shortly. We're truly grateful to have you here, and we've selected some special stories just for you. Click on the links appearing now, and we'll see you there for more unforgettable moments.